So today's lesson is graphing using X-intercepts, Y-intercepts, and the vertex. Now, we consider this equation y equals 2x squared minus 16x plus 24 as the standard form. So anytime you hear me talk about the standard form, we're looking at something that is of this form. Y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. And that is standard form. We said that we were going to take a look at x-intercepts, y-intercepts, and the vertex. Now, the easiest type of calculation that we're going to do today is called the calculation of the y-intercept. In essence, we let x equals 0 in our equation to get the following. Equals 2 bracket 0 squared minus 16 times 0 plus 24. Now you know that if I take a look, anything times 0 gives 0 and anything times 0 gives 0 again. So the very next line of our equation is this: y is equal to 0 minus 0 plus 24. Our final answer is y is equal to 24. And then we say therefore the y-intercept is 24. Now, every time I ask you to do the work, you need to show the work using this form that I have given you. Sometimes I'll ask you to show the calculations for the y-intercept. Now, another way to do it, if you're running out of time, is to just look for the last number on our equation, and this value is the y-intercept, and it will always be the y-intercept. So I could have looked at my original equation and I could have noticed that 24 was the last number in my equation, so the c value is 24, so that means my y-intercept is the c value in y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. You can use that to quickly calculate the y-intercept. If I ask you to show the calculations, substitute x equals 0 and you get your answer. Space where notice is was intended to show you that the y-intercept is the c value in the standard form. Y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. Moving on to the x-intercepts. When we find the x-intercept, we always let y equal 0. So that means our original equation turns into this: 0 equals 2x squared minus 16x plus 24. Now, this is the form that we used when we had to do our factoring or use the quadratic formula. So let's summarize how we're going to do this. In essence, we have two ways to solve or find y-intercepts. Now, one way would be to factor. And there are three types of factoring that we studied, and they are common, simple, and difficult factoring. Now, another way to find a solution would be using the quadratic equation, which is this thing here. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Remember, you always have to have two solutions for those. 0 or 1 solution. For this next problem, we're going to factor. Now, the first thing we do is we notice that 2 can factor everything in that equation, so we'll pull that out. Now that we've done that, we end up with 2 with the quantity x squared minus 8x plus 12. Now what we'll do is we will factor. So in this case, we need two numbers that multiply to negative 8 and add to negative 12. And those two numbers are negative 6 and negative 2. Now our bracketed quadratic turns into the following, which means that either x plus minus 6 equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0, which means x in this case is 6, or x is equal to 2. So therefore the x-intercepts are 6 and 2. Now we'll do a quick sketch of what we've got here. So when we draw this, our graph looks similar to this. We will have our x-intercept, our x-axis, and our y-axis, and we'll just plot all the points that we know. The first point that we recognize is that we have a y-intercept of 24. So I'm actually going to plot that on with this red dot, and I'm going to label it 0, 24. Since it's on the y-axis, its x value is always 0, because originally we set x to be 0 and we found y to be 24. Remember, this is also your c value from the standard form. Now, my other 2 points are 2 and 6. What you want to do is you want to label your points 2, 0 and 6, 0. So when I have an x-intercept, it's the y value that is 0. Now we'll go about calculating our axis of symmetry and our vertex. The axis of symmetry is calculated like this. Well, remember those two values. The two values for the x-intercepts were 6 and 2. And it's going to actually be in between those 2 points. So what we just have to do is we have to add them, which ends up being 8 over 2, which ends up being 4. So we can say our axis of symmetry is x equals 4. Now, the final stage of this process is to find the vertex. There are 2 ways to find it. Either we sub our axis of symmetry, in this case x equals 4, into our original equation to find our y value, or we complete the square in order to find the vertex form. So I'll just do one for you right now. Here we go. Start with your original equation. Then what you're going to do is you're going to group everything that has our x's in it. Then common factor the number that is sitting in front of the x squared term out of this bracket. And we get the following. Make sure you leave an extra brace, an extra space in the bracket. In this case, once you've factored out, you're going to get x squared minus 8x. And now you'll notice that I put an extra space here. This is the b value that we need to complete the square. So we're going to take negative 8, divide it by 2, square it. So that ends up being 16. We'll add that to our bracket as a plus and a minus. And now that I've done that, I want to go and take this negative 16, because that doesn't make it make this bracket a perfect square. We're going to take the negative 16 and multiply it by 2 and bring it outside to get the following. 2 bracketed with x squared minus 8x, and then plus 16, and then the number that's on the outside ends up being negative 2 times negative 16, which ends up being negative 32 plus 24. And now this bracket here is ensured to be a perfect square. So now what we're going to do is we're going to simplify. So we get, well, remember my trick. Take the square root of the first term. Square root of x squared is x. Take the sign of the middle, minus, and take the square root of the last, which is 4. And that's our squared term in our vertex form. And then this last part is minus 32 plus 24, which is minus 8. Therefore, the vertex is, well, 4, negative 8. Remember that the inside of this bracket is opposite worlds. So instead of being negative 4, our value for our x value is 4, and the outside stays normal. Now, back to our graph from before. So remember we started a graph earlier. With our graph, what we need to do now is we need to draw a few things like a axis of symmetry. Our axis of symmetry is exactly halfway between our two x-intercepts. And then what I want you to do is I want you to label this x equals 4. And then, if you're really smart, you'll notice that if I have a point right here, right, I'm going to find another point exactly the same distance away from this thing. We call that the mirror line, or the axis of symmetry. Now that I've got those 2 points, and I have my vertex, which I will plot as 4, negative 8, which is somewhere down here, now I can go and graph the rest of my parabola. Goes through the points, down and up. And make sure you draw your arrow, and then you label your equation. Y is equal to 2x squared minus 16x plus 24. On your assignment today, you're going to have 3 equations that you're going to work on. If you feel really good, you can do the rest of them. You're going to work on page 28, number 1, A, B, and C. And also remember, you have your in-class submission as well that uses this entire lesson. In-class assessment is lesson 6, exit task. And you can do that over the weekend and submit your work for Monday at about 9:15. Good luck, guys.